Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I want to talk about curating my eyeshadow palette collection. How I curate, why I curate, my thought process that goes into it. If this is a topic which interests you, I do hope that you'll stick around. And if you're new here, hello, my name is Rachel. I'm a homeschooling stay-at-home mom. I really enjoy colorful eyeshadow, and I try to upload several videos a week that are all eyeshadow related. Depending on the children's naps, sometimes it's more, sometimes it might be a bit less, but that's always the goal. I hope you'll consider liking and subscribing before you go. Now let's get rolling with the meat of this video. Before I forget, today's eyeshadow look, I tried to film it, it was a bit of a fiasco, so it's going to be featured in my next While I Was Out, which are videos where I showcase looks that I've done off camera. Keep an eye on my channel for that, and that playlist is linked above. Okay, so the first question, of course, is why do I curate my eyeshadow palette collection? And there are a couple of points that I always have in the back of my mind. I never want my hobby to be overwhelming for me. I have tons of eyeshadow palettes, then I start to feel buried. I start to feel like they're encroaching upon my creative space, and I'm not able to really express myself, really dive into the fun of doing an eyeshadow look if I have too many options. It's the same mentality behind why I don't enjoy very large eyeshadow palettes, because there are just too many choices and I start to get overwhelmed. So I want to keep my collection pared down, where every palette I own is something which is truly enjoyable. I enjoy the formula, I enjoy the color story, it's something which excites me, inspires me, and I enjoy working with that palette. If I have too many palettes, it's physical clutter in my home, on my bookshelf where they're currently stored, or in a cupboard, or wherever I keep them. But there's also mental space that I have to consider, because each of those palettes takes up a little slice of my mental storage capacity, and if I have tons of them, there are too many things bouncing around in my head and there's no clear space for me to freely think. Clutter of any kind does that to me, whether it's children's toys or books or DVDs or kitchen gadgets. Any clutter at all does that to my mind. I don't think I'm the only one, because I know my mom and my sister are like this as well. I'm sure that a lot of you, if you have a lot of clutter in your home, you start to feel kind of like it's swallowing you up. Well, that's mental clutter. And if I have too many eyeshadow palettes, even though they're a physical thing, they translate to mental clutter. I also curate my collection because as I progress in my eyeshadow journey, I discover new formulas and brands that I really like. New things that become favorites and surpass the performance of older things. Perfect example, when I started doing eyeshadow, I bought a lot of ColourPop, and then I branched into BH Cosmetics, and then I found Beauty Bay, and throughout this, 2-year process, I have found which brands perform the way I want. They give me the results and the performance that I enjoy, and other brands kind of start falling behind. So I have decluttered almost all of my ColourPop, even though at the beginning I had exclusively ColourPop. I mean, ColourPop was a great starter for me. It was very affordable. The formula was good. And overall, I wouldn't say it was good for the price. I would just say it's good. But now I've discovered some indie brands that are very good or excellent or fabulous formula, and ColourPop, even though it's still good, is lower and lower on the list. So I curate my collection as I learn and grow and figure out what I like and what does or doesn't work as well for me. So once we've established why we would curate our collection, the next question, of course, is how to do that. I talk so often with people who have huge eyeshadow palette collections, and just like I said in the beginning of this video, they start to feel overwhelmed. They no longer find joy in their hobby. It becomes a burden. It sort of sucks all the fun out of it because there's just too much. And we talk about how getting rid of things can free them up creatively and mentally to actually want to play with eyeshadow again. So how do we do that? Of course, a declutter is one of the primary ways. Do I like this palette? Do I like the formula? Do I like the color story? Do I use these colors? Those are things to consider with every single palette you own. And if you're at all familiar with the Marie Kondo method of decluttering, and she was the originator of the Sparks Joy concept, as far as I'm aware, she talks about when you're getting rid of things, passing them along, whatever category you may be decluttering, pick it up and hold it in your hands. And this might sound a little bit silly, but look at it and thank it for its service to you. Thank it for what it brought to you at that season of life. It sort of gives you some closure for that item, like you don't feel emotionally tied to it. That was something that I actually did with my daughter when she was really little and having trouble getting rid of toys. I said, okay, well, take this stuffed animal and look at it. You can feel it. You can appreciate it in several different senses. Hold it, squeeze it, feel its cuddliness, remember the colors, and say to the toy, thank you for letting me love you. Thank you for being here when I needed something to hug. Thank you for being my cuddle toy at nighttime, and hug it. And then when you put it in the giveaway box, it's like, okay, I've said goodbye. Again, That might work for some people, it might not work for others. I'm not going to get too wrapped up in the concept of personifying something, but the idea was very helpful for a young child when it came to closure. We're going to get rid of these pants now because they don't fit you anymore. You can remember the trees that you climbed and the bikes that you rode while wearing those pants, and then let them go. Does that make sense? So the idea of decluttering an eyeshadow palette collection sort of falls in line with that. Pick up the palette. Do you like the packaging? Does it feel quality? Do you open it up and go, ah? Are there colors that you use? Are the colors that you enjoy? Is it a formula that works for you? All of these things are things to consider when you're decluttering a palette. And a declutter obviously can be a great way to curate your collection because you can go through every single palette you own and say yes, yes, no, and you know the reasons why. And then when you've gotten rid of a bunch, you now have a much more curated collection. And every palette within that collection is something that you have physically gone through and decided you wanted to keep for these reasons. It has these merits and it's worth keeping. When I'm bringing new palettes into my collection, I always am thinking about what I already own and in what formulas or from what brands. Does this new palette fill a gap? Does it offer me colors or formulas that I don't have or that I really, really enjoy using? And these are different nuances of those colors or shades or tones or undertones or whatever. Is it bringing something new or is it just a different version of what I already own? A subscriber had asked me quite a while ago, if you found a palette or a color story that you already owned, but in a better formula, would you put out the money to buy the new formula and get rid of the old? And I said yes, because if it's a palette that I really enjoy, but it's a formula that's not great and it is being overshadowed by other palettes with better formulas, maybe not in the same sort of color story, and I love the colors, but I don't use it so much because of the formula, I would definitely consider replacing it. Bring in the new because I know I love those colors and get rid of the old, and then I know that I would really enjoy and use the new version of that. A perfect example of that is the Flare palette from Ace Beauté. I have owned this palette for quite a while in the old formula, and recently Ace Beauté had a sale running on their website around Memorial Day. It was marked down to $16.99 plus shipping. And I thought, you know, I've always ranked the Flare palette as like top 5 in my collection. Every time I do a ranking video, Flare is high because I love the color story. I find it very inspiring, quite unique. I always say it's sort of harvest leaning, but then it has these random pops of color that really make it interesting. That palette always sparks creativity in me, but the old formula is not very fun to work with. I mean, it's okay. I haven't gotten rid of the palette because of the color story, but I don't use it as much as I like because of the formula. So I emailed Ace Beauté's customer service and I said, this Flare palette listed on sale on your website right now, is it the new upgraded formula, the same as the Paletopoly formula? Because I love the Paletopoly palette from Ace Beauté. And they wrote back and they said, yes, this Flare palette is the new formula, same formula as Paletopoly. So now when I'm considering that purchase, I'm thinking, okay, it's a formula that I know I really like. I really enjoy using. It works well for me for my technique. And it's a color story which I love. And it's a color story which constantly inspires me to do something different. It's not boring or expected. It's just, it suits me well. Since I ranked this palette so high, I mean, I really didn't have a problem spending 20 bucks, because if we counted shipping and whatnot, spending 20 bucks to buy a palette that I have always enjoyed, but a better formula, because I'm much more likely to use it in the good formula. Let me give you a couple more examples of when I'm actually curating my collection. I had the Midnight palette from Beauty Bay, the 16 pan, not the giant one, it was just the medium size. And I ended up getting rid of that palette because I brought in the Lure palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics and the Michaela Pot 2 from Glamlight. Both of those palettes were really great quality, very, very good formula, and they offered me a wider range of the blue-purple color story that the Midnight palette offered me. When I had all three palettes sitting side by side, I'm like, well, I just don't need Midnight, because whatever Midnight can give me, I can find in these two palettes, and I prefer the formula, the packaging. They also bring me more colors, more tones, more depths, more variety, so I decluttered Midnight. Another example would be still the Lure palette and also the Earthy 42 pan from Beauty Bay, which was a gift from a subscriber. I had those two palettes come into my collection, and between the two of them, I decided to declutter the Oceanic palette from Ace Beauté in the old formula. I might not have decluttered if I had it in the new, but I had it in the old. So I thought, you know, this palette's beautiful, but when I had Lure and I had Earthy, I just didn't need Oceanic. It was almost a duplicate, even though it wasn't all the same. There was enough overlap that having another palette in my collection, which was blues and greens, it was just too many choices. If I want to do a blue-green look, I've got 4 different palettes to reach for. What do I do? And I don't want to put that burden on myself. I always want this hobby to be joyful for me. The final example I'll give you is actually a neutral palette. I brought in the Anastasia Beverly Hills Nouveau palette, and I used that to replace the Summer and Saint-Tropez palette from BH Cosmetics, part of their travel series. It was a lovely palette. It wasn't my most favorite color story, but I'm not much of a neutral lover. But the Nouveau palette is, for me, neutrals with a twist. Just a fun, unique angle on neutrals. And when I used the two palettes on my eyes, I preferred the way that Nouveau looked. I thought that the undertones were a better fit for my skin and my preferences. I didn't necessarily prefer the formula because the BH Cosmetics travel series was a very good formula, but I just thought that the quality looked a little bit higher class. It wasn't quite as shiny. It was just a bit more downplayed, but still quite lovely and pigmented. Overall, side by side, I simply preferred Nouveau. So I decided to declutter the Saint-Tropez palette because I am a color lover when it comes to eyeshadow. I certainly like to dip into neutrals or sometimes just go all neutral. My husband's not a big fan of eyeshadow, so if I am wearing some eyeshadow on a weekend or something when he's around, I usually tend more neutral so that it's not quite as objectionable to him. But the point is, I didn't need a lot of neutral palettes in my collection, so when I found one that I truly enjoyed more than another, I didn't need both. So those are just some examples of curating my eyeshadow palette collection. It is slowly growing. It's just, I like to keep my collection manageable. I feel that if I have too many palettes, I am encumbered by my collection, feeling pressed down and hemmed in by this hobby, and that pulls all the joy and all of the delight out of it. And I never want that to be the case. I never want this fun little creative expression where I have paintbrushes and my face is my canvas and I can put on pretty colorful things. I never want that to be stressful. If it's stressful, it's no longer a good hobby for me. It kind of is a self-defeating exercise. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you feel that your collection is manageable, workable? Do you think it's too much? If you do think that you'd like to pare it down and curate it a bit more, what are some steps that you've taken to achieve the collection that you really want? Something that is full of only palettes you truly enjoy and love and appreciate. Let me know what you think. I appreciate you being with me here today, and I hope that I will see you again in my next video. Bye.